Welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast, where your host, Josh Sweeney, will give you, the business leaders, HR professionals, and company culture aficionados, the knowledge you need to take your company culture to the next level.
Hello, my name is Josh Sweeney, and welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Prototype Prime for this amazing podcast space. This is season 2, which is all about hiring, and this season is co-hosted by Annelle Barnett.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for coming out.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right. So today we are going to talk about what brands do to attract talent. So, Annelle, what are you seeing that is differentiating brands when they're trying to attract new talent?
So brands are definitely getting more creative with this. They, as we've discussed on some of the previous podcasts, the economy has caused the power shift to happen, taking the power away from employers and putting it in the hands of candidates. And so the more that a company or employer can differentiate itself, the more chance that they have on attracting the brightest and most qualified talent.
Yeah, so let's start off with some of the top brands and what we're seeing in those brands. I mean, I know there's like these very storied brands like Google where you go in and you're getting breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and they have computer repair, and they pick up and drop off your dry cleaning. You know, what are some other things you're hearing from like this?
Pods too that you can
like sleep pods and who knows what else.
Right.
I wasn't able to get in to try it out, you know. They didn't give me the tour.
Right, yes.
So what else are you seeing in some of the well-known brands that they're doing to differentiate?
Yeah, so Google specifically is, obviously they're kind of the leader or one of the leaders in this area, but they, one of the things that they do for their employees is give them the opportunity to spend 20% of their time on creative task or creative idea generation rather than on task-oriented projects. And they're also trying to weed out what could be defined as a bro-centric kind of culture that exists in Silicon Valley at this point in time. So it's, those are two examples for them. And then you have a company like Salesforce who this year committed $3 million to normalizing the gender gap in pay, so gender parity, so that women are paid the same amount as men, and they've taken an initiative company-wide to make sure that everyone is paid equally.
Gotcha. Yeah, it seems like some items that should be fixed by like some of the pay bands and titles that we talked about on our last episode, right? Like,
yes.
It doesn't matter male, female, or otherwise. Like, here's the band, and here's where you're at.
Yeah.
What else are you seeing?
Well, I think in Salesforce's case, they have acquired so many companies, and so when they integrate that company and those individuals into the organization, then they realize that the pay is not necessarily equal. So I think their traditional business has been more normalized, but then bringing people in that weren't in that organization to begin with. Another thing that they do, which is really interesting, is that they give their employees 8 days off for them to specifically use to give back. So whatever community involvement activity you believe in, or whatever nonprofit organization you believe in, they give you 8 days to contribute to that, to whatever organization or cause that you'd like.
And those 8 days don't count the weekends, right?
And those 8 days don't count the weekends.
Right. I love it.
Yeah, correct.
I'm going to step back to the pay parity, gender parity, and that item. And I think you captured a bit of why it's complex. Like, I think a lot of people look at it from the outside and say, well, this is just wrong, and here's the way it should be. But I guess we don't really step into thinking like, well, why is there complexity?
Right.
With like you acquired a company, maybe you acquired a company and their their pay gaps were way out of whack because of the culture of that company, right? And that's a problem you inherit, right, through those acquisitions. So it's interesting to bring that in along with different just people, the complexity of people
Right.
when you're bringing them in from different regions, from different backgrounds, and I'm not saying just male female parity, but parity across the board
Right.
on when it comes to pay and equality and other things like that. There is a lot of complexity when you're in acquisition mode. And I'm wondering, other than acquisitions, what are the other ways that a company can have this really down pat where they have it very well balanced and some external or some other factor makes it complicated. So the acquisition's easy. You just acquired 1,000 people. So, and they
Right.
didn't have it quite as well spelled out. Can you think of anything else that would happen in a business that would, throw a wrench in something that was well thought out ahead of time?
I can't think of anything specific. I do know, unfortunately, some people are better at asking for raises and bumps in pay and things than other people are. And unfortunately, traditionally, women have been traditionally less likely to ask for higher salaries and less likely to negotiate. And I think it's great that the world is changing and employers are actually, creating this parity across the board as an initiative rather than it be left up to the individual person who has to fight
Right.
for their right to earn the money that they earn, which is, it's unfortunate. Another thing that's coming into play in that regard is in several states, it's now illegal to ask someone's past salary.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, for instance, I started out in the newspaper industry, and the newspaper industry is just traditionally not a very well-paid industry. It's and especially the one where I worked, it was a really cool, fun, news weekly that was in Nashville, and it was all about entertainment and restaurants and things like that. And so it was a lot of fun to work there. But we weren't paid very well because that was just the nature of that industry. And so then when I went to my next job, which was in technology, I was also not paid very well because it was based off of my last job that was in a
Right.
totally different industry. And, by the time I left that company, it had evened out and I was being paid, fairly. But it's, whatever job, at least in the past, whatever job where you started out was going to define how much you made for the rest of your career, which is really unfortunate. So that's what they're trying to avoid with not being able to ask what someone's prior salary was, just because the company, sometimes startups pay less than larger companies do, just because the startup doesn't have the financial resources to pay more. And that individual made that choice because they wanted to work for the startup and they wanted the perks that come along with working for a startup. But then if they switch to another role, then their pay, if you ask the question about their previous salary, then their pay is determined by that rather than by their contribution to the organization.
Yeah, I know. I was very fortunate to get coaching early on, when I was probably 20, on how to tactically and tactfully dodge that question.
Right.
Where I wouldn't tell you in an interview what I got paid at my last role.
Right.
Because it was completely irrelevant.
It is irrelevant.
It was like, what does this role do?
Right.
And I was switching roles, so it made it even harder. Where I didn't want to carry over my pay from the last role, and
Right.
I made moves and got significant pay bumps.
Right.
Because of that one tactic. And I think going back to our previous podcast around the locus of control and hiring, switching over from the company over to the candidates.
Right.
Now people have even more control over what they do and don't want to share. So they should have better negotiating power. And I think it puts a little bit of the burden back on the company to say, you know what, you need to be looking at what the pay bands are. You need to be
Right.
justifying why your pay is less than the other company that fits this pay band, or the one on Glassdoor or any of the other sites that are out there. And I know there's some nuance around explaining to people how accurate some of those really are and things like that.
Right.
But it does change the thinking around that and enforce bands and
Yeah.
certain salaries.
And it can actually go the other way too, because those bans can be very restrictive and can keep you from getting quality talent because you can't go outside the bands when you
Right.
hire someone. So, having those restrictions, there's also restrictions around vacation and things like that. Somebody coming to a new organization, in the first year, they get 2 weeks of vacation, whereas they're 20 years into their career.
They're used to 6 weeks or,
Right,
or something
and they're
significant.
used to between 4 and 6 weeks at another organization, and it actually hurts the ability of an employer to hire them away or to a lot of times I'll hear that it's just kind of overlooked. The person who manages this person just kind of overlooks that they aren't there for a week.
Right.
Without
under the table benefits action.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So
black market benefits.
Right. So the the bands and things, they create the parity
Gotcha.
across the organization, but they can also be restrictive. And a smaller organization that doesn't have these standardized bands are able to recruit away talent and bring people on a little more easily because they don't have them.
Yeah, I know I ran into the situation where I only got a little bit of time off with an organization I joined. And it really came down to, I already had plans for the next year. I already knew what I needed off and that it was not balanced. And, I guess, it was a little bit on me that I didn't negotiate that up front and say that's just not going to work. And it came to a point where I was like, well, so let's assume I'm going to take this time off. Is this unpaid time off? Or, I talked to a friend of mine and said, how do companies do this? And he said, well, they can give you unpaid time off, or, they may say, well, you're just not allowed to have that much time off. Right. And I'm like, okay, so it's unpaid. And if they say no, it's a resignation. And, what are my other options?
Right.
Or cancel a trip or whatever it might have been that was scheduled a year out. So yeah, I've run into that myself and could see how that could be a challenge.
And then employers sometimes will get around the bans and things with other perks. For instance, they may give you a sign-on bonus so that the individual still gets the salary or still gets the level of income that they are looking for, but it's not officially the salary. Or they'll throw in a car allowance or something that
something the company can write off.
Right, exactly.
Another way.
Right. So that they still stay within their band parameters, but they can attract an individual with those kinds of perks and add-ons.
Yeah, definitely. I know I had a friend of mine that, they knew that they were a little bit below, not much, but a little bit below kind of the average industry. They were a smaller company, but they made up for it in a lot of their perks. Like when you got onboarded, you got the right equipment, you got the right gear, like their philosophy was part of that. The reimbursement that they had on healthcare was substantially higher than others.
Right.
So it was like, okay, you had to choose what matters more. Does the few thousand extra dollars to match the average in this role matter, but you're going to go to a big company and maybe be a cog in the wheel and only get a certain amount of reimbursement, things like that. Or do you want to be here in the company culture that they had?
Right.
So, they really used it as a selling point and were very clear about the pay.
Right. And there's study after study that shows that pay is not the number one motivator for people. Yeah. Of course, they want to be paid fairly. They want to, make enough money to support their family and support their lifestyle, but it is not, it's all of the other stuff that is more important typically. It's the day-to-day. You spend half of your life at work. So if someone doesn't enjoy it or feel challenged or appreciated, then those things are a lot more important to individuals than the actual money.
Yeah. So what else are you seeing from smaller brands? Salesforce and Google, they're big. Right. We know they make lots of money, great margins, software. What are you seeing other brands doing to attract talent out of your typical stuff around, healthcare reimbursement, car allowances, what other ways are you seeing that they're leveraging their brand to attract talent?
Yeah, I think, different kinds of fun activities and things to bring the culture together and to bring the people together. I actually worked for a company in my career in the past that every quarter we had a company-wide meeting, and if the company had a positive quarter, everyone left with some dollar amount in their pocket, and it wasn't a check, it wasn't in our payroll, it was, we literally walked out with cash.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So 1 year, I think.
I'm not going to ask if that was like you had to claim taxes or anything on that. We'll just
Well,
it
it wasn't that. It was usually 500 to 1,000 was the max.
Gotcha.
So it was never enough that you had to claim taxes. But 1 year we did it was during the holidays, and we did a money tree basically. And so we went and got a Christmas tree, and I guess that doesn't necessarily follow the no religion at work rule, but you couldn't really
to the money menorah and
right, exactly.
Whatever else we can come up with.
It worked with the money tree theme basically. So we attached envelopes to the money tree as though it was like Christmas ornaments, and every single person in the organization got to come up and get an envelope, and some people left with $500, some left with $25, but it was really just kind of it was a gamble of what you got, and it was fair across the board, so that it was all done by chance. So
right.
Unfortunately, sometimes like the sales rep who makes $300,000 a year walked out with the $500, and that wasn't what you were hoping for. You were hoping for the $30,000 a year person to walk out with the $500, but all's fair in love and war. So,
or in what tree? Money trees.
The money tree, exactly. Right. Yes. So, back to your question, those kinds of things, like that kind of atmosphere and culture spread, and they tell their friends and they tell their friends, and then you attract really good people from your current employees. They're often going to be like-minded and similar in work ethic and things like that. So if you have really good employees, then using them, positively using them to help drive or to help attract other individuals.
Yeah, I love it. These are lots of great examples on how brands can attract talent. So we would like you to think about how your brand can attract talent, what you can do to get amazing people to become part of your company. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Epic Company Culture Podcast with Josh Sweeney. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. For additional content and transcripts, visit epicculture.co. If you have questions or topics you would like us to address or expand on, tweet us at epicculture1 or email at podcast@epicculture.co.